minutes or 50 minutes. The way we're going to run things today is go ahead and have the talk first, do the Q&A, and then we'll break a little early, and we have a couple people assigned to defend the food out there. Manager of the Taiwan Democracy Project here at the Center for Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law. This particular talk is co-sponsored by the U.S. Asia Security Initiative, which is part of APARC, the Asia Pacific Research Center here. And I want to thank them for their co-sponsorship. I also want to thank the acting director, Takeo, is he here? I don't see him. Thanks to him as well, and also to the sponsor of our program, the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office in San Francisco. They've been generous funders of our program for 10 years now, and we thank them for that. Without their support, we wouldn't be able to bring in wonderful speakers like Richard Bush. The talk today, the theme of the talk today is cross-strait relations after the Taiwan elections. As most people in this room know, there were elections in January of 2016, and there was a major shift in political direction. The longtime ruling KMT lost both the presidency and the legislature, and the opposition DPP captured both. And particularly the legislature, this is the first time that the DPP has ever controlled a majority in the legislature, and that gives them significantly more ability to shift policy direction in a whole bunch of areas, including cross-strait relations. And so this is an uncertain time in cross-strait relations for many reasons, but first and foremost because of the election. Furthermore, it just so happens that last week the Chinese foreign minister was in Washington, D.C., and among a bunch of other remarks was asked about Taiwan. And in his remarks he made, he said at least two things, or he said one thing and he didn't say another, that caused a bit of a stir in the Taiwan media. The thing he said was that they expect Taiwan's new leader to follow the laws of their constitution across the strait in Taiwan. To anybody's knowledge, that's the first time that the PRC has actually explicitly acknowledged that Taiwan has a constitution. And so that caused a bit of a stir. The other thing is what he didn't say, which is he made no remarks or no mention of the '92 consensus, which is an agreement, a kind of unspoken agreement or informal agreement between the two sides that was made in 1992, that they would have, they both agreed on a one China principle with different interpretations. And this is, for many years actually, been the PRC's kind of a bottom line in cross-strait relations. There was no mention of that. And that's important in part because Tsai Ing-wen, the president-elect in Taiwan, is actually in a very difficult position if she has to acknowledge that. Most of her party vehemently opposes any recognition of the '92 consensus. And so this is all a long way of saying it looks like there may have been some movement on the Beijing side. And I can think of no better person actually to tell us whether that's true or not than our speaker today, Richard Bush. Richard Bush is, for many of you, probably needs no introduction. He is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, director of its Center for Northeast Asian Policy Studies, and the Chen Fu and Cecilia Yan Gu chair in Taiwan Studies, one of the few Taiwan chairs around the country. He came to Brookings in July 2002 after 19 years working in the U.S. government, including 5 very important years as the chairman and managing director of the American Institute in Taiwan, which more colloquially is known as the American Embassy in Taiwan, the de facto embassy. And you'll note that 1997 to 2002 crosses administrative handovers, partisan changes in both Taiwan, from a KMT to a DPP administration in 2000, and in the United States, from a Democratic to a Republican administration. So he had some very interesting experience during his 5 years there at AIT, and he's now well known in Taiwan for that experience. He's the author of a number of articles on U.S. relations with Taiwan and China, and of 2 books, actually, At Cross Purposes from 2004, And much more recently, Uncharted Strait, The Future of China-Taiwan Relations, which was published in 2013. Actually, he's got a third book on here, too, Untying the Knot, Making Peace in the Taiwan Strait. So he's written extensively about this, and we're very fortunate to have today Mr. Richard Bush. So join me in welcoming him.
Thank you. I think I'm going to stand up and speak loudly. I can see people better. Thank you, Karis, for that nice introduction. Thank you for having me, both Karis and Larry. It's always nice to be here. It's great to see Mike Armacost, who is actually the person who hired me to come to Brookings, and then he left, and he was not responsible for anything that I did. I have to begin with a reminiscence. The first time I spoke in Encina Hall was in May of 2000. And the late Mike Oxenberg, who spent the last years of his life and career at APARC, knew that I was going to Taiwan for the inauguration of President Xi Jinping. I was, as chairman of the American Institute of Taiwan, I was kind of an ex officio member of the delegation that the White House organized to go to the inauguration on behalf of the American people. We use these code words to avoid saying U.S. government delegation. And so Mike asked me to come and talk here on the way back, and I did. And it was in one of the bigger sort of function rooms in this building. And then Mr. Shorenstein kindly that evening had a dinner party in honor of me and my wife, and I had to sing for my supper there. And so, in a way, we've come full circle. 16 years later, we again have the DPP coming to power in Taiwan, as Karis indicated, in a more robust fashion than they did in 2000. In 2000, I have to say there was a fair amount of panic at the idea of the DPP coming to power. Panic in Beijing, a panic in the U.S. government, panic, frankly, within the DPP because they hadn't expected to win. And then all of a sudden, they were responsible for governing an island of 23 very rambunctious people. And they did their best to manage. So this time is not a question of panic, but it is a question of a certain degree of nervousness because of uncertainty about what's going to happen. Tsai Ing-wen doesn't panic, frankly. She's always very cool, but there's a lot to consider. So I want to do 5 things. I want to briefly go over sort of the facts of actually what happened on January 16th. Talk a little bit more about the reasons behind this result to the extent that I can speculate about them. And then I want to ask the question, for which I don't have an answer, but I think it's an important question. To what extent does this reflect a fundamental change? This election reflect a fundamental change in Taiwan's political system? And that will provide a segue to to China's reaction or potential reaction, and then I'll talk about U.S. policy. So I put numbers up here on the board. I hope you can see it. The basic numbers of the election are that Tsai Ing-wen got 56.1% of the vote in the presidential election, ended up with 68 seats. They had started with 40 of the Ma administration. There was dissatisfaction about him personally. There was disunity within the party, and to some extent, President Ma caused that himself in 2013 by trying to purge Legislative Speaker Wang Jin-pyng, and that just sort of intensified the tensions between the northern and southern wings of the KMT. Third, there was a really messy process in trying to pick the KMT's candidate for this election. And Eric Chu, who I thought was going to run in about this time last year, decided not to run, and then he was basically pressured into running last fall, and by which time everything was over. The KMT did this to itself also in 2000, which is the big reason they lost. There have been, as my fourth reason, growing anxiety in Taiwan about getting too dependent on the mainland. There was a poll in December where 2/3 of those responding said that Taiwan was too dependent on the mainland, which is a commentary on KMT policies. And then there's the factor of turnout. I'm sorry, I should have pointed to some figures when I was talking about dissatisfaction with the KMT. I'm sorry. If you look at the figures in the presidential election from 2012 and the legislative election, Ma got, 2008. Ma got 58% of the vote and his opponent got 42%. In the legislative yuan elections, the KMT got 81 and the DPP got 27. So in 2008, the KMT did better in driving the DPP from power than the DPP did this time in driving the KMT from power. What this suggests is that 8 years is about as long as the voters in Taiwan will tolerate a party in power, so far. Then on turnout. The gross figures for the presidential election are this time 66.3% of the vote. 2012 it was 74.4%, and 2008 it was 76.3%. But this is even more interesting if you look at the actual vote totals for each of the candidates in the last 2 elections. And that is what turnout really means. It's individual voters actually showing up at the polling place and casting a ballot. In 2012, Ma got 6.891 million votes, Tsai Ing-wen got 6.094 million votes, and James Soong got about 1/3 of a million votes. This time, Tsai Ing-wen got 6.895 million, which is about the same as Ma got in 2012. Eric Zhu, the KMT candidate, got only 3.813 million, and James Soong got 1.577. Very different set of numbers in terms of party turnout. And so some of the votes that you might have expected the KMT candidate to get based on the 2012 vote went to James Soong, who is also a blue candidate. Tsai may have picked up a few of those votes, sort of, let's say, light blue people. But there's still like 1 million KMT voters who are unaccounted for. And who one might have expected in a different sort of year to show up and vote for the KMT candidate. So something really interesting is going on. So that's the KMT side. A lot of problems with how they ran this election, and a lot of dissatisfaction within the party itself, in addition to the public. In contrast, Tsai Ing-wen and the DPP did everything right. DPP was hungry for victory, and therefore it unified around Tsai, who frankly brought it back from a near-death experience in 2008. Mobilization of voters has always been the DPP's strong suit. There was a bonus of support from young people who were sympathetic with the Sunflower Movement, sympathetic with the DPP, and don't always turn out to vote. And finally, in contrast to 2012, Tsai Ing-wen commanded the agenda